Welcome to the debate. If you found a chest of gold in your backyard, you wouldn't just, take one handful, lock the gate, and then completely refuse to look at it again for 50 years.
Right, no, you definitely wouldn't.
Exactly. Yet in 1972, humanity walked away from the moon, which was our greatest technological triumph, and initiated a half-century of just, absolute silence. And today, we're asking why.
It is honestly, without exaggeration, the most profound historical anomaly in the record of human achievement. The door was unlocked, we stepped through, and then we actively slammed it shut.
So, the central question we are exploring today is whether that 50-year gap in lunar exploration and our sudden impending return with the Artemis missions is adequately explained by shifting economic and geopolitical priorities.
Or, conversely, if that silence, especially when combined with the exponential leap in our technological capabilities and some really bizarre anomalies in the Apollo data points, to a deliberate choice to avoid the moon due to, an undisclosed discovery.
Right. I argue that the cessation and our subsequent return are entirely driven by pragmatic resource allocation, shifting from Cold War symbolism to newly discovered economic incentives like water ice.
And I argue that the 50-year halt defies the exponential advancement of technology, suggesting that gaps in the Apollo archives point to an unexplained discovery that forced a deliberate withdrawal, making Artemis II effectively a reconnaissance mission.
Okay, so I think we have to start by grounding ourselves in the realities of the 1970s. You look at the halt after Apollo 17 and you sense a mystery, right?
I do, yeah.
But the context is entirely mundane. At its peak during the Apollo program, NASA consumed almost 4.5% of the entire federal budget. Today, it operates on about 0.4%.
Sure, the budget shrank.
We didn't lose the technology to go to the moon. We lost the political willingness to write a blank check. Look at the geopolitical reality of 1972. The Cold War space race was won. The moon wasn't really a scientific destination, it was a finish line.
But a reduction in budget doesn't explain an absolute cessation across the entire globe for 5 decades.
Well, it does when you look at the cultural context. By the time Apollo 17 launched, the American public was exhausted by the Vietnam War. Inflation was rising.
Yeah, the public was distracted.
Distracted and bored. Television networks weren't even broadcasting the moonwalks alive anymore. The geopolitical points against the Soviet Union were already scored. Space exploration didn't stop, it just moved closer to home. We traded a symbolic flag on a distant rock for a permanent scientific presence in low Earth orbit. We built the space shuttle. We built the International Space Station.
I don't disagree that the ISS is a marvel of engineering. But, you are describing a plateau, not a continuation.
A plateau?
Yes. We spent decades circling in low Earth orbit, doing incredible science, sure, but we never looked back outward. And this is where your budget argument falls apart for me. Computing power didn't just grow, it exploded. The cost to launch payloads into orbit plummeted, mostly due to the innovations of private space companies in the 21st century.
The barrier to entry lowered, absolutely.
Lowered, it collapsed, and yet, through all of that democratization of space technology, the moon remained untouched by human hands. It's like discovering a new continent, mapping the shoreline, planting a flag, and then every global superpower universally agreeing to embargo the ocean for half a century.
I think embargo is a strong word.
But that doesn't happen without a profound reason. If priorities simply shifted, as you claim, then surely at some point in the 1990s or 2000s, an agency or a visionary private enterprise would have realized that returning to the moon was now relatively cheap and safe. A shift in priorities explains a 10-year pause. It does not explain a 50-year embargo.
I think that drastically underestimates the sheer logistical and physical chasm between reaching low Earth orbit and sustaining human life in deep space. It's not just about having a faster microchip.
But the technology...
To say we abandon space is like saying a diverted river has stopped flowing. The current of human ingenuity simply carved a new channel toward the space shuttle and the ISS.
But a river doesn't just...
The life support systems, the orbital docking mechanisms, the long-term microgravity research, the ISS required the exact technological advancements you're referencing. Deep space is lethal. You don't just go back to the moon because you have a better smartphone in your pocket. Capability does not automatically generate a Mandy.
No, but you do go back if there is something of value there. Your entire premise assumes that Apollo found nothing but dead rocks and dust.
Because that's what the geological record shows.
And that brings us to the archival realities of those final missions. We aren't just looking at a technological paradox, we are looking at an informational black hole.
You're referring to the missing data from the Apollo archives.
I am. I'm referring specifically to the fact that vast amounts of high-fidelity telemetry, medical data, and unreleased voice transmissions from those final missions simply vanished. Let's look at the most famous example, which sets the precedent: the original Apollo 11 slow scan telemetry tapes.
Right, the missing tapes.
The pristine, highest quality video of humanity's first steps on another world. NASA officially admitted in 2006 that they lost them. And their explanation? They claimed the original magnetic tapes were erased and reused in the early 1980s because the agency was facing a tape shortage.
Which, as embarrassing as it is, perfectly illustrates my point about bureaucratic reality.
You genuinely accept that the crowning achievement of human history, overseen by thousands of the brightest minds on the planet, was erased to save a few dollars on magnetic tape?
It happens. The level of redundancy in Apollo communications was staggering. To brush off the erasure of primary data from the most critical phases of lunar exploration as mere mundane archiving errors requires an enormous leap of faith.
It doesn't require a leap of faith. It requires an understanding of how massive data storage actually worked in the 1970s. You are talking about millions of hours of telemetry, voice recordings, biomedical readouts, physical films.
Sure, it was a lot of data.
All being managed by bureaucratic organizations utilizing massive spools of analog magnetic tape. Tape degrades. Formats become obsolete. Files get shipped to the National Archives and mislabeled in warehouses the size of airplane hangars. Are we not conflating the mundane realities of 1970s data storage and archival loss with a deliberate cover-up? If it were just one clerical error, I might agree. But pair those specific, undeniable gaps in the archival record with a sudden unannounced halt in lunar exploration after Apollo 17, followed by a 50-year absolute silence despite exponential technological growth. A pattern emerges. History proves over and over again that not all discoveries are immediately revealed to the public. Some are studied in secret or left alone. If something anomalous, something unexpected was observed during those final missions, it perfectly explains the behavior. It explains the decision to pivot entirely to low Earth orbit, a safe distance away.
But listen to the structure of that argument. You are building a positive claim, the existence of a hidden, anomalous discovery, entirely out of negative space.
I'm looking at the evidence.
You're using the absence of data and the absence of missions to prove the existence of something profound. From an evidentiary standpoint, that's incredibly precarious. Missing segments in a colossal, decades-old dataset do not inherently prove the existence of an anomalous discovery.
It proves that the official record is incomplete. And when the official record of our greatest achievement is incomplete, we have to look at the resulting actions. The action was withdrawal.
The action was pragmatism. There was no immediate, tangible economic return to justify the enormous risk to human life, which brings us to the present moment. If there's nothing up there but dead rock and lost tapes, why is NASA suddenly spending tens of billions of dollars on the Artemis program right now? Why are we going back?
That is exactly the question. Why now?
Because the paradigm entirely shifted in 2009. That was the year NASA confirmed the presence of water ice in the permanently shadowed regions near the lunar South Pole. And I cannot overstate the mechanics of how monumental that discovery was.
Oh, it changed the economic calculus completely.
Exactly. It transformed the moon overnight from a barren museum into a deep space gas station. We aren't just talking about drinking water for astronauts. We are talking about the mechanics of electrolysis. You set up solar arrays on the rims of these craters where there is near constant sunlight.
Right.
You beam that power down into the shadows where the ice has been frozen for billions of years at -400 degrees. You melt it, you run an electric current through the water, and you split it into liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen.
Rocket fuel.
Yes, rocket fuel. The single most expensive part of space exploration is dragging heavy fuel out of Earth's massive gravity well. If you can manufacture fuel on the moon, the entire solar system opens up. The moon becomes the staging ground for Mars. Combine that with the discovery of helium-3.
Which is abundant on the lunar surface because the moon lacks a magnetic field.
Right. For billions of years, the moon has been acting like a sponge, absorbing solar wind loaded with helium-3. Here on Earth, helium-3 is incredibly rare, but it is the holy grail for nuclear fusion. Deuterium-helium-3 fusion produces massive amounts of energy without emitting stray neutrons, so no radioactive waste.
It's clean energy.
It could revolutionize clean energy on Earth. So you have water ice for fuel, helium-3 for energy, and you add in the geopolitical pressure of China successfully landing on the lunar far side. Artemis isn't a reconnaissance mission checking on an anomaly. It is a purely economic, strategic, and empirical land grab.
Okay, I don't deny the mechanics of water electrolysis or the theoretical potential of a neutronic fusion with helium-3. Those are real, quantifiable factors.
Thank you.
But they also serve as incredibly convenient public justifications for a return that feels fundamentally driven by a different imperative. Let's look closely at how Artemis II is actually structured. Officially, it is described as a test mission, a crewed flyby that will loop around the moon and come back without landing.
A necessary step before we put boots back on the regolith with Artemis III.
But is it necessary? Think about the technology we have today compared to the 1960s. We have the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter currently circling the moon, mapping the surface down to a half-meter resolution.
Sure.
We have 3D topological maps. We have supercomputers that can simulate every conceivable variable of a lunar orbit, gravitational pull, and thermal dynamic. If helium-3 and water ice are the undeniable economic gold rush you claim they are, why the extreme hesitation? A simple flyby test mission where we don't even touch down seems extraordinarily cautious.
Well,
We are dipping a toe in the water. I argue the true purpose of a test after 50 years of advanced satellite observation is reconnaissance. If something was found and hidden decades ago, Artemis II is humanity cautiously checking to answer the only question that matters. Is it still there?
I strongly disagree with that characterization of modern spaceflight. You don't send humans back into deep space without a test mission, regardless of how good our computing power is today. You are confusing computational power with physical endurance.
I wouldn't say I'm confusing them.
Yes, we can simulate an orbit, but you cannot perfectly simulate the thermal dynamics of the Orion capsule's heat shield hitting the Earth's atmosphere at Mach 32 on the return trip. You cannot simulate the real-time degradation of life support systems with actual human biomechanics in the loop over a 10-day deep space flight.
And yet in the 1960s, with a fraction of that technology, they pushed the boundaries with breathtaking speed. They went from orbital flights to lunar landings in a matter of years.
Because they were fighting a proxy war with the Soviet Union, and they accepted an astronomical level of risk. It was the cowboy era of spaceflight. Today, the culture is fundamentally different. We lost 14 astronauts in low Earth orbit with the Challenger and Columbia disasters due to engineering oversights.
That's true.
NASA's current risk tolerance for human life is practically zero. Caution is the hallmark of modern space exploration, not evidence of an ulterior reconnaissance motive.
I understand the safety culture argument. I really do. But if we are returning purely for ice and isotopes, why the 50-year gap to develop this safety culture? If we wanted to go back safely, we could have initiated a slow, methodical return in the 1990s. The timeline just doesn't fit the natural progression of science.
So you think Artemis II is a secret mission?
I'm saying we are going back to look before we touch.
Let's follow your logic for a second. If Artemis II is a secret reconnaissance mission to check on a hidden 50-year-old anomaly, why is it the most public, highly publicized, internationally collaborative space mission in history?
Because hiding in plain sight is often the most effective strategy.
But the mechanics of the mission contradict the premise of secrecy. NASA didn't build Artemis alone. The European Space Agency built the service module that provides power and propulsion for the Orion spacecraft. There's a Canadian astronaut on the Artemis II crew.
Right. It's international,
They are putting ultra-high-definition cameras on the capsule to broadcast the entire flyby to the world in real-time 4K video. If you are terrified of what you might find on the dark side of the moon, you don't invite international space agencies into the control room and broadcast the mission live on the internet.
Unless the reconnaissance isn't about looking out the window with the 4K camera. What if the reconnaissance is electromagnetic? What if it's about testing the environment's reaction to a human presence after 50 years? You can broadcast a smiling astronaut in the capsule while classified sensors sweep the surface. The international collaboration actually provides the perfect cover of a purely scientific endeavor. We didn't stop going to the moon because we lacked the capability, and we didn't stop just because the TV ratings dropped. We stopped because we chose to, and choices of that magnitude are never made without a profound reason.
But that requires us to assume a multi-generational, multinational conspiracy of silence, perfectly maintained for 50 years across thousands of personnel, shifting administrations, and rival governments. And that has to hold true while robotic probes from India, Japan, China, and the US have actively scanned every inch of the lunar surface.
Institutional silence doesn't require thousands of people in a dark room. It only requires compartmentalization of data. The people building the rockets don't need to know why the rockets were delayed for 50 years.
Well, I base my perspective on the observable, verifiable mechanisms of history and economics. We achieved our geopolitical goal in 1972. The political capital evaporated. We pivoted to the immediate engineering challenges of the space shuttle and the ISS to learn how to live in space permanently.
I know that's the official timeline.
And now, armed with the 2009 discovery of water ice, the mechanical understanding of how to turn that ice into rocket fuel, the economic promise of helium-3 fusion, and frankly, a renewed international rivalry with China, we are finally returning. The 50-year gap and the current Artemis missions are best understood through the lens of human pragmatism. We paused when the points were scored, and we are returning now because the moon has become intrinsically valuable to our survival and expansion.
And my perspective rests on the undeniable mathematical and technological realities of the last half-century, which simply do not align with a passive abandonment. A 50-year embargo in the face of exponential technological growth, the democratization of space access, and plummeting launch costs is an anomaly that budget cuts alone cannot explain.
We'll have to agree to disagree on the budget aspect.
Fair enough, but the erasure of original telemetry tapes and the inconsistencies in the Apollo archives suggest a deliberate, perhaps necessary choice to stay away. Artemis II, framed as a highly cautious test mission, despite our incredible computational mapping, represents humanity finally deciding to confront whatever prompted that sudden 1972 withdrawal.
Well, while we fundamentally disagree on the driving force behind the 50-year silence and the exact nature of our return, I think we both acknowledge and agree on one crucial, undeniable point. The moon has fundamentally shifted in our collective understanding. It is no longer just a distant, symbolic finish line to be crossed for national prestige.
Absolutely. That is a point of total convergence. The moon has transformed into an incredibly vital, dynamic focus of human ambition. Whether we are drawn back by the allure of deep space resources like water ice and helium-3, or pushed back by the need to resolve an unexplained anomaly from our archival past, Artemis II marks a profound turning point.
It really does. Regardless of its ultimate motivation, Artemis means humanity is once again crossing the threshold into deep space. The narrative of human history, technological advancement, and institutional behavior is deeply complex, and often, the surface-level explanations only tell half the story.
Which is why I would encourage anyone listening to not just take the official timelines at face value. Dig into the mechanisms of what happened. Look at the publicly available Apollo archives. Examine the history of those lost transmissions, and track the developments of the Artemis program with a critical, analytical mindset. Ask yourself why things happen when they do.
Indeed, there is always more to explore, both in the mechanics of our universe and in our own historical records. As we watch the Artemis generation approach the moon, we are reminded of that unlocked door. The frontier is opening once again, And whatever the reason, humanity is finally stepping back through.